Hello! Here's the second video on the Spanish-American War. After watching this video, you should be able to analyze the causes of the war between Spain and the United States and how American citizens responded. So, what were the causes of the Spanish-American War? Well, there are several reasons. First of all, many Americans felt like they understood how the Cubans felt about being under Spanish rule because Americans had a similar experience with the British. In other words, the Americans felt a bond with the Cubans because Americans felt like both countries, the United States and Cuba, had similar struggles against European oppressors. Secondly, the newspapers in America were publishing all kinds of terrible and sensational news articles, which sometimes included sketches of reporters' stories about how terrible the Spanish were to the Cubans. And those stories and images really pushed American public sentiment towards war. One of the artists of those drawings, Frederick Remington, told his publisher of the New York Journal, William Randolph Hearst, that war between the United States and Spain probably wasn't going to happen. Hearst supposedly said, "You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war." These sensational stories, called yellow journalism, were probably not always true, but were certainly successful in selling newspapers. And the stories, especially about Spanish concentration camps, made Americans increasingly mad. One of the last events to really go against the Spanish was when President McKinley sent the battleship Maine to the Havana harbor after riots broke out in the Cuban capital. On February 15th, 1898, while the battleship was off the Cuban coast, it mysteriously exploded, killing 250 American sailors. An investigation right after the ship exploded determined that a mine, which is just a bomb in the water, caused an explosion. However, in the 1970s, another investigation into the explosion of the Maine found that it might have been a part of an internal problem, which ignited its own powder. In other words, the Maine may have blown itself up. Most historians now believe the Spanish did not blow up the ship. Published jingoistic news stories calling for revenge and asking Americans to remember the Maine. That was enough. There was a declaration of war. So how did Americans respond to this? Well, Americans responded to the war with Spain pretty enthusiastically. Some Americans, like Theodore Roosevelt, who would one day be president, resigned from his job as Assistant Secretary to the Navy to join a volunteer group of soldiers called the Rough Riders that consisted of cowboys and college athletes. Americans loved to hear stories in the newspapers of the Rough Riders winning the famous battle at San Juan Hill, and these tales of victory added to Americans' newfound confidence in their country. Additionally, Americans generally felt like they were helping the Cubans after the passage of the Teller Amendment. The Teller Amendment said that the United States had no intention of annexing Cuba, which for Americans seemed to verify that the United States had noble intentions. This was not a war about conquest. In Americans' minds, it was solely for the good of the Cubans. Now, after watching this video, you should be able to explain why the United States went to war with Spain in 1898 and how the United States citizens responded to the crisis. Thanks for watching.